was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, elevation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries, and I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for designating this little bit of time of your life to check out the show. As we wait for our guest, Glenn Diesen, to join us, and remember that there's a time discrepancy because I believe that there's like a 7-hour difference, okay? Shout out to Shelly, shout out to Collie Beans, shout out to Brachaska, shout out to Chad Franklin, shout out to everybody in the chat. As we wait for him to join us, we'll talk a little bit, and let me tell you about some of the itinerary first for this coming week. Europe. He's from Europe, okay. Check this out. We have tomorrow morning at 11 Central Time, we have the Robin Hood of Wall Street, the economic guru, Gregory Mannarino, hitting us. Next week, we'll have Larry Johnson, CIA agent, and Larry Wilkerson, former chiefs of staffs of Colin Powell. Colin Powell, he'll be here on the platform too, and we have a few more guests. I told you I've been working everybody. I've been trying to get everybody. Hope he accounts for daylight saving time. Whoa. Yeah. Shout out to Finland is in the building. I just sent them a message, okay? So we'll wait for him to join us. And I believe, I'm telling you, this time discrepancy is killing me. And I know it's like a 7-hour difference. And so it's supposed to start at 3. And he may have gotten it mixed up a little bit. But every time we do this, if we have a mix-up or a guest doesn't show or they get the wrong time or something, they come right back and make up for it. So don't worry about it. We're going to chop it up until he joins us, okay? Like I said, I've been working behind the scenes trying to get you some of the top-notch guests. We got a few more surprises in hand. I want to just, from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you all for joining me. Because you did not have to give me your time, and you chose to give me a little of your time. So we're going to try to make it work because we're gonna dig into a lot of things that's going on. So I've been listening. Yeah, Larry Wilkerson. Yeah, he'll be on the show, Shelly. Larry Wilkerson, and we'll have Larry Johnson on next week also. And tomorrow, like I said, Gregory Mannarino. Oh, and we'll have Carl Zaw on the show. I don't know if it's this Friday or sometime next week, but we'll have him back on the platform also. So I didn't want to leave my guy Carl out. Shout out to the Caribbean or the Caribbean, whichever I call it, the Caribbean. Shout out. He said we take red pills and we dish him out all day, every day. Okay. Now listen, I see there's a lot of stuff going on in the news where I was just checking that there was a peace offering made for cessation of violence by the Trump administration. Listen to me good, everybody. I know what everybody is saying to you guys. I know what everybody is selling to you guys. But if it doesn't really make sense, does it make sense? And I'm going to tell you about that. Russia has been saying no pause in the violence, no pause or no cessation of the military operation without verifiable and acceptable agreements on the recognition of new Russian territory incorporated into it, the removal of the regime that was put in place by Britain and the United States in Ukraine, the denazification and all of that stuff. Now, we keep hearing, well, Russia will accept a cessation of violence. If they do without all of that, what about the lives of the people that were lost to fight for the denazification of Ukraine? What about the people who went out there on the limb, these other countries who went out there standing up with Russia? What about them? You understand? So before Russia could accept something, which is, I would call it, accepting defeat out of the jaws of victory, they would have to also talk to their allies and other nations that stood with them toe-to-toe against the sanctions, with all of this stuff like this. Because to accept a cessation of violence is to rearm Ukraine. Matter of fact, let me tell you something to show you what I'm saying. Hold on one second. You know we like to prove stuff, and I hope this is still up. Give me a second. There was a Russian general. Where is it at? I don't know if it was on Sputnik or if it was on RT. Let me go to RT real quick. There was a Russian general said, no exceptions or accepting a pause in the violence. The U.S. just wants to rearm Ukraine. And let me see if I can pull it up for you guys, bro. RT. Give me a second. I guess they moved it, but I guess they moved it off the main page. But he was saying that don't fall for the tricks of a cessation of violence or the acceptance of a pause in the violence, because the United States and France and NATO will just rearm Ukraine. Didn't they do it the last time? Didn't they do it the time before that? What about the Minsk 1, the Minsk 2? And then the negotiations again in Turkey that fell apart thanks to Britain. Huh? Every time they give away some of their, how would I say this? Some of their demands, the United States and the Western nations take advantage of it, and they build on their intransigence worldwide. Huh? Why would Russia do that? This would show Putin to not be as swift as up here as we think he is if he accepts it without them clearly accepting the demands of Russia, right? Denazification, the removal of the US-UK backed regime in Kiev, right? And the recognition of the newly brought in Russian territories, all of that, right? And you're going to accept a cessation of violence without any of that coming to be, even if the United States removes sanctions, some sanctions. Nations are looking, and they'll say, you know what Russia did? Russia used us to remove sanctions, and they turned tail on their so-called core interests and demands just for the United States to save face and NATO to save face. So if something like this happens again, we can't be sure to stand with Russia because she may do the same thing. Do you know, brothers, sisters who are watching me, do you know that Iran had that same gripe against Russia? Do you know that? Nobody talks about that. Iran had the same gripe that I'm speaking about with Russia when Iran was under tremendous sanctions by the West. And Iran was in these military deals with Russia, and Russia reneged at the last minute, right? And Iran said, hey, look, we paid you for the weapons, give it to us. And Russia used a UN resolution, I guess, to justify why not transferring X amount of weapons that Iran purchased to Russia, right? And then when Russia came under sanctions, guess what Russia did? Russia then said, Iran, we must forge a partnership and we must beat the sanctions, when Iran was telling Russia that the whole time when they were under sanctions. But there's no teacher like experience, okay? Experience is your best teacher. And as Iran was explaining to Russia, listen, the U.S. and the West could do this to you at any time. Russia thought that it would not happen to them until it happened to them. And then Iran said, well, what about when we were telling you this stuff? What about how you reneged on the deals that we have? Can we be assured that from this point on, when you receive sanctions relief, when you get a good pat on the back by the West, you will stand toe-to-toe with us? Do you know the Chinese, when they went into the discussions with the Russians brought that up too? Do you know the South Africans brought that up to Russia? Do you know that's what caused Brazil to flip-flop? Because they weren't sure if Russia would stick to it if they received sanctions relief and be brought back into the fold of the Western nation. Because this is one thing about Russia that most people don't recognize. In the halls of Russia, there's a vying for influence. One wants to recalibrate Russia to the East bloc. And then you still have those Atlantists that yearn to be accepted by Britain and the United States. They yearn to be accepted and brought into the fold of NATO. So Russia has to look at all of these different aspects before they accept something that America and the West cooks up for them, because eventually it will be used as a trap. All we have to do is look at the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And each year thereafter, how America became more and more emboldened and more intransigent and less mindful of other people's national security interests and less mindful of the agreements, international agreements they partook of and international agreements that they promised to be a part of, because they then had the advantage. Again, let's go back to something that I often say. When America is hemorrhaging, when the empire is bleeding, they need rest, rearmament, and recalibration. Let's say that again. Rest, rearmament, and recalibration. Those are the 3 R's in the cog of empire. So we know that they're losing. As a matter of fact, there's an article coming out on RT right now, breaking. It says breaking. Ukrainian forces encircled in Kursk region, Russia's top general says. 86% of Kursk region's territory previously held by Ukraine has been liberated, Valery Gerasimov has claimed. Ukrainian forces in Kursk region, Western Russia, have been encircled and isolated. Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, has said on Tuesday. He added that 86% of the territory has been liberated and that the systematic destruction of enemy forces is underway. All right. Isn't it ironic that as that is going on, and the United States is meeting with Ukrainian forces or Ukrainian leadership in Riyadh or wherever in the Near East, that all of a sudden the news is starting to say, hey, we are offering a peace agreement, a cessation of violence for 30 days. Isn't that what Macron tried to get? Isn't that what Starmer tried to get? Isn't that what the U.S. was throwing around for the last couple of weeks on the background of the political chatter coming out of Washington, D.C.? And all of a sudden, as the lines break down, as the territory that Ukraine wanted to keep as a negotiating ploy is falling back into Russian hands. And as Ukraine is being brought face to face with the reality of the economic situation that they're in and the West faces, the military situation that they're in and the West faces, and the geopolitical and political consequences that they now face and the West faces, they now bring this chatter that was once in the background into the front. When they're hemorrhaging, when they're bleeding, what happens? Rest, rearmament, and recalibration. And what would a cessation of violence for 30 days do? It will give the West and Ukraine a much needed rest. They would then be able to rearm. And by this time, Western nations could then put more special forces into Ukraine, more weapons, more hardware, more air defense systems in Ukraine to make it that much harder for Russia to bring this military operation to a conclusion, while the United States then recalibrates its imperial policy to then wage war against Iran and then try to break China and prevent it from becoming a cemented global power. That is what they're looking for. That is what they're trying to do. Look, Shelley says, Listen, Shelley says, rest, rearmament, recalibration. Got it. You better believe it. That's what I'm saying. And whenever they want this, they'll put it in the background, and you'll hear it from time to time from alternative media, from mainstream media, and from some officials who are not major officials. And then it works its way up to the mouths of those who really pull the levels of power. But all of this stuff is a head fake for you all. It is not for peace. I don't care what you say. It is not for peace. When has America demonstrated that she wanted peace? Tell me that. I'm moving my microphone, everybody. When has America demonstrated that she wanted peace? I know the time that she demonstrated she wanted peace. When she wanted a piece of your land, when she wanted a piece of your economy, when she wanted a piece of your resources. That's when she demonstrates that she wants peace. But the peace that she demonstrates is CE, and not the PEACE. So this is a ploy to gain a little time. Why am I saying that? You have to understand the background of this. America and the West are under a tremendous political burden at home. Because if you look to Europe, growing homelessness, growing agitation from the people about how the government is no longer listening to the will of the people, how they're flaunting on television, they're talking about the democratic values of the West, and then bar democratic elected leaders from running for office. When we look at what's going on in America, growing poverty, a great divide, a cultural divide, racial divide, economic divide, political divide, everything is coming apart at the seams for the Western world. And they believe that if they can some kind of smoke, bring the fire down to just a smoldering ember, then they could let that fester for a while and then recalibrate on Iran. Iran will not accept the nuclear agreement. Iran will not do this. Iran will not do that. So that the American people will not focus on the policies of the West that has brought them to the state of feudalism and poverty. You understand me? Create an enemy, use your military wherewithal to then target that enemy, use whatever economic power that you have left to try to break that enemy, and show through your media that that is the enemy, so that the people can hate Iran and go for another war. That is why what you see going on in the U.S. government is going on. Let me say this. I've said this under Biden. I've said this under Obama. I've said this under almost every administration. So when I say this about Trump, don't think that I'm just picking on Trump because he's Trump. Because I actually think on some measures Trump wants to do certain things. Right? But let me tell you something. These people need debt. These people need war. The only way the Western economies can stay afloat is through the military machine, because they must inflict destruction and devastation to justify more investment in armaments in the military industrial complex, which employs a lot of people. And also they must commit to military operations so that they can target economies that are booming, bustling, and growing outside of the West, and also snag what resources they can from other nations so that they can continue to expand. They are parasitic. Matter of fact, let's go to something real quick. All right, give me a second. All right. All right. Now, this is what AI has to say about parasite. A parasite is an organism that lives on or in another organism, the host, and derives benefit by obtaining nutrients or resources. Often, listen to this part, often at the expense of the host, which is typically harmed in the process. Tell me if that is not an accurate description of Western policy. Let's go with that again. This is from AI. A parasite is an organism that lives on or in another organism, the host, and derives benefits by obtaining nutrients or resources, often at the expense of the host, which is typically harmed in the process. So, all one has to do is look at all the military bases around the world, not just of America, Britain, Canada, Germany, Belgium. All of these people have military bases. They have outposts everywhere. They call some of them overseas territory. How did you get that territory? You didn't discover it because there was people there. So how did you get it? You got it by might of arms. And why did you take it? Because it was strategically located and there was resources there for you to exploit. That's what parasites do. You understand me? That is what parasites do. So it goes, let's go to what Google has to say about it. All right. It says, and Google's definition is pretty much the same as the AI's. Google says an organism that lives in or on an organism of another species is host and benefits by deriving nutrients at the other's expense. So without expanding the debt burden, okay, America cannot continue to justify deficit spending. And if she is forced to live within her means, she cannot continue to feed the military-industrial complex. She cannot continue to dominate the waterways, the airspace, or the lands of other people. And she would have to come back within her own borders and be treated as an equal. This is unacceptable in the mind of the American exceptionalist. Understand this, that the dollar is the life's blood, all right? And without the dollar being the world reserve currency, America can't export inflation. America cannot manipulate her interest rates to cause other nations' economies to collapse and the overthrow of governments. She cannot live the lavish life on the back of the world. And she must live within her own financial constraints. That is one reason why she removed the dollar from the gold and silver standard, because it had constraints on it. You could only spend X amount of money because you only had X amount of gold and silver held in your accounts. And once it reached that burden, you would have to then justify to the world why you need X amount more. America's not in for that. It's me, the dictator. You are the ones who are being dictated to. So Nixon moved the world off the gold and silver standard because America, as Shelley said, is a vampire. That's what I continue to tell people. You know what vampires do? They suck the life's blood out of people. That's what parasites do, right? They suck the life's blood out of their victim. Why do they do that? They do it to maintain their way of life. Because without the life's blood of someone else, the vampire shrivels up and dies. But when the vampire finds the victim and bites the host and sucks the blood out, guess what happens? It is to the detriment of the host. Isn't that what parasites do? This is America. This is the Western world. And they're waking up to a new reality, one which they're not too happy about. And they're willing to take the world to war for this. So why do you think that they removed Assad? Let's go to this for a minute to show you just how dictatorial and just how parasitic they are. And just to show you just how arrogant they are and how they use human rights and democracy as a shield for their dirty policies, okay? Assad was not even a target. But because Assad became an obstacle, he became a target. All of the things that transpired in the last 20 years in the North African, Middle Eastern area were strategically done to make way for war against Iran. Do you think that America transferring a bunker buster bombs to Israel months and months, almost a year ahead of time, before they were used to target Hezbollah's leadership, do you think that was an accident? And guess who contacted the Hezbollah leadership and said, hey, a deal is done. We now accept such and such. And once the Hezbollah leadership let down their guard, the United States had AWACS flying, pinpointed where they were, gave the information to Israel. Israel used the very bombs that America had previously transferred to them to assassinate not just the Hezbollah leadership, but to also kill hundreds of civilians and destroy blocks upon blocks of civilian infrastructure. Huh? Do you understand? Do you actually believe that all that was done on the spur of the moment, or how they assassinated Rafik Hariri? Do you know that Syria was a block for Israel to do what she's doing? I want you to, let's go back down memory lane, because we got to put this stuff in our memory banks so that we can bring it to the present day, so that we can understand exactly what is transpiring. Okay, all right. Heidi K, thank you for what you said, but you know what? It's a shame, but YouTube continues to take the subscribers. They continue to do it, and I know I'm enemy number one, but it's all good. Hey, as long as I can talk to you guys, I'm happy. Whether it's 5,000 subscribers or 500,000 subscribers, truth is truth. So long as somebody gets it, okay? So listen, like I said, let's go back down memory lane. Rafik Hariri, the multi-billionaire and entrepreneur and Western stooge, groomed his son, right? But he was a stooge for the West, feeding intel on Hezbollah and on Iranian movements, and so that the West could target them. But Israel could not do much. Why? Because Syria at the time had a real good military, and the military was in Lebanon. So Israel could not fly those flights over Lebanon, bombing Syria or bombing Lebanon. So they had to get rid of Syria, and guess what they did? After Rafik Hariri used up his usefulness, they assassinated him and then blamed it on the Assad government. And then the Western press went into auto mode, started hammering it down. Assad must go. He must remove this. And they gave Assad an ultimatum. And after Assad, listen to this now, because this goes back to Russia again. After Assad conferred with Russia, Assad then agreed to pull his troops out, because he was hesitant to pull his troops out of Lebanon. And he was almost ready to do whatever necessary to protect the Lebanese along with the Syrians. But after consulting with his allies, Russia and Iran, he decided to accept an agreement to avoid further bloodshed. And he pulled his troops out of Lebanon back into Syria. And what does this open up? An air path for Israel to then be able to bomb Lebanon, and also at times shoot missiles from Lebanese airspace into Syria. What happened then? They won Assad to Turkey when Assad was trying to open up economic pathways with Turkey, and they said that they would be the closest of friends, and then Turkey betrayed Assad and let terrorists infiltrate from the north. Jordan had them coming from the east. The United States and Israel had them coming from the south, and the Syrian Arab army was under constant threat, but they held out real good. Listen, I told you this will be a little history lesson, okay? Because we're going to bring it up to speed. So, as they held out real good, Assad was hesitant in bringing on anybody else because he knew his forces were good enough. But the strain of the military, right, the economics, because America knew that she had to do something to undermine the Syrian Arab army's economics. So guess what she did? When the Syrian, when the terrorists came into Syria, guess what happened? They didn't attack the army barracks. They didn't attack the naval facilities. They didn't attack major Air Force bases at first. Guess what they attacked? They attacked the air defense bases. If you think I'm lying, go look at it. Go Google it. Why would terrorists who have no Air Force attack air defense bases? Huh? They were making a wave. They were sending wave after wave of terrorists in there to exhaust the Syrian Arab army. And finally, Syria had to consolidate their forces and pull back from some of the air bases. Notice at the beginning of the Syrian war, the United States never dared to fly their warplanes into Syria. They didn't dare to openly say that they had special forces in Syria. It was only after the terrorists captured multiple air defense bases, then the United States said that we're going to fight ISIS in Syria. No UN mandate, no invitation by the Syrian Arab government, and then said if the Syrian Arab government fire upon U.S. planes or coalition planes, then we have the right to self-defense. You know what that is tantamount to? That is tantamount to me going into Shelly's house and telling Shelly if she fires that gun at me for me coming in through her window, then I have the right to self-defense. You see how ludicrous that is? Shelly tells me, don't come into my house. Matter of fact, stay off my property. And I said, well, under this law that I just made up, I'm going to go through Shelly's window. But I'm doing it to help her fight against the robbers and the crooks that are planning to come into her house. And Shelly says, listen, stay out of my yard. And then when I go through the window, I tell Shelly, if you fire on me, I'm going to fire back in self-defense. Does that make sense to any of you guys? See, we have to put this stuff in a proper perspective so that you can understand the foolishness that they feed to you guys on a regular basis. They feed nothing but propaganda to you guys. Every day, all day, a steady stream of propaganda. So after the air defense bases were captured, America ate some brave cereal and then started flying into Syria. And then as Russia was helping and Iran was helping, America said, well, our utility here, we can't justify our reasoning being here because Russia is doing X, Y, and Z. And then America, all of a sudden, as Russia and Iran and Syria was mopping the floor with ISIS, said that we'll intervene and we have beat ISIS. Didn't do anything for over a year. It was Russia, Syria, Hezbollah, Iran that was doing it. But America, as she took credit for World War II, took credit for what's going on in Syria. And then they said that we have to starve the Syrian Arab army. So they made a pitch for the Euphrates, and they got the fertile land and the oil and gas rigs, and they held it hostage. And that is what started bringing the Assad economy down, not corruption. It was imperialism. So now they finally remove Assad. So now you've weakened Hamas in the Palestinian territories. You've weakened Hezbollah in Lebanon. You've removed a thorn in your side, Assad in Syria. Now guess what that does? That clears a pathway for you to Iraq. Guess who controls the skies over Iraq? The United States. And guess who borders Iraq? Iran. And what did Dick Cheney say? Anyone can go to Baghdad, but real men go to Tehran. And what did Israel say before all of this took place? They feared a major conflagration because of Iran's proxies. Because they knew that if they got in a war with Iran, they would face a real beating, not just by Iran, but by Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and the Syrian Arab Republic. So they rid themselves of those major threats so that they can go to war with Iran. And do you know right now, as we speak, the United States is now supplying all kinds of weapons to their facilities in occupied Palestine or Israel? You know that right now? I'm talking about right as we speak. And you telling me that they want peace? Huh? Tell me what's the difference in Trump and the difference in Biden. Biden says, we'll support Israel no matter what. Trump says, we'll support Israel no matter what. Tell me what's the difference. Huh? If you support a robber, a raper, an organ harvester, a death dealer, according to U.S. law, what does that make you? An accessory to the crimes, right? Is that not right? We've got to stop looking at this outside of the scope of everyday life. We've got to bring it towards everyday life, because when you bring it towards everyday life, your everyday life connects with you. But when we have it so far away from us, it doesn't connect to us, so it doesn't bother us as much as it should. You understand? Just give you an example before we go a little further. If a little girl, God forbid, gets hurt or killed, if you don't know anything about that or little about that, it may bother you a little bit, but it doesn't affect you. But if they are blasting it on the TV screen constantly, you feel and somehow you're connected with that person, and it becomes more of a personalized thing. That's what we have to do when we're looking at these things, because people's lives are at stake. America and Britain, especially and specifically, but also the Western world, they view lives as throwaway plates. That's what they do. How can you justify the massacre of so many people in Palestine, the massacre of so many people in Lebanon, all across Africa, It's so much going across Africa that you can't even really name a country, because there's so many of them that the West is fomenting terrorism and destabilization there, because in their mind, it's a game. They call it the Great Game. And their job is to prevent stability so that the nations won't progress, and then make independent policies to then reach out to friends other than Western nations to do business with. So lives are expendable, and you can throw them away like a plate. That's parasitic. That's like a succubus or a vampire. I'm going to use you up and throw you away. And so, man, you know what? I tell you what, let's go to something real quick. Listen to if you don't think this is the case, I want to bring something to you real quick. All right? Where is it at right here? Give me 1 second, everybody. If you believe that America is not fighting for her life with the dollar, I'm gonna play some short clips for you guys, okay? Because I want to bring a point home. The reason that she's in the Near East is not just to control the oil and gas, but to prevent stability. What is their motto? What is the Israeli Mossad and Shin Bet and the CIA and the MI5 and the MI6? What are their motto? Order out of chaos. So they want to create chaos. Why? So that they can keep and maintain their world order. And they need the dollar in prime position to do this. So they see the dollar collapsing at breakneck speed. And they must do any and everything that they can to prevent that, because they want to keep their global order together, because they have benefited from it at the detriment of the masses. Parasitic, right? So I want to show you something real quick. Listen to what they were saying about the US dollar and the financial system, okay?
Well, I think the idea of de-dollarization is one which is going to be necessary. You have two aspects to it. One is the efforts of the United States to dictate the rules of trade and currency to all nations, which is the basis of the dollar system or the petrodollar system, is no longer valid. This was a neo-colonial system that was imposed largely through the military force of the United States and NATO, regime change, for example, against Gaddafi, the attempt to overthrow the Assad government, the Iraq attack. and now the Ukraine war, so to try to weaken Russia. But it's not going to work. Many countries around the world, especially in the so-called global south, are now moving out from under this so-called rules-based order. And this new deal between France and China is an example of that. You also had the Chinese involvement in the rapprochement between Syria and Iran. Saudi Arabia and Iran. We also see trade going between India and Russia with a ruble-rupiah transaction basis. So we're in an era where the unipolar order doesn't function. And we see it with the collapse of the banks in the United States, the collapse of the Swiss giant Credit Suisse, the toppling, or the teetering, I should say, of the Deutsche Bank. So we're moving into a new era in which the emphasis will be on multilateralism rather than rule by one unipolar power.
So now I'm gonna go back to something real quick because I just saw a comment and then we'll come back to this dollar thing. I just saw a comment that needed to be addressed. Where did it go? Shifting realities put this up here. Said, did Assad have S-300s? Yes, but guess what? Russia would not allow them to use it. So what was the use of having it? Again, what was the use of having it? I want you to think about this. This is what I call out. I call out the hypocritical policies of everybody, okay? So some people might think I pick on other people. No, I call it as it is. Not like I want it to be, but how it is. Because the only way to get to the bottom of this is that you have to be truthful and call it like it is, okay? Now, Assad and Syria were a Soviet and then Russian strategic ally for decades. They stood with them toe-to-toe, all of this stuff, right? Then Russia puts constraints on its ally when it finally delivers S-300s, because before then they had antiquated, and then they updated the antiquated S-200s. But then Russia shipped, because they were getting a lot of pressure, they shipped 1 or 2 S-300s to the Assad government, right? But here's the thing. They kept them under Russian control. Even when Israel was bombing, that's why when Assad fired on Israel, he was firing on them with S-200s, not S-300s. So I want everybody to look at this, because when we dog America, which we should for the stuff that she does, we dog Britain for the stuff that she does, and we should. But we can't let Russia go either with the stuff that she did. Because think about this. Decades upon decades upon decades, the Syrian nation stood with the Soviet Union and then with the Russian Federation. Russia supplies Assad with S-300s, but has restrictions on them. They must stay under Russian control unless Russia gives them the okay. Then goes to a NATO country, a country that helped complicate stuff in Ukraine, a country that has helped to complicate things in Syria and helped to overthrow the Syrian government, and gives them S-400s without any limitations or constraints. And this nation of Turkey just so happened to be a member of the organization that is trying to encroach upon Russia's border. What kind of strategic sense does that make? Huh? Talk to me. You put constraints on Assad. Then you wouldn't sell Iran or wouldn't hand over the weapons for a while to Iran. But you quickly signed a deal with Turkey, and then you handed over the S-400s. Huh? How does that make any sense? This shows you that these people, the leadership has to be in the rich. And I'm not talking about just in America. I'm talking about global leadership. Some of these people will sell their mothers for money. So look, let's go back to this dollar thing. Heidi K has a good issue, and let's see. Heidi K says making sure that Israel has air supremacy over Syria. Absolutely. I'm trying to catch up. Let me go back a little bit because I don't want to. I'm missing a lot of stuff, everybody, and I'm trying to get to a lot of stuff at the same time. So please forgive me, okay? This thing is going up so fast. I'm going to go back to the comments in a few minutes, okay? This thing is jumping quick. But let's go back to another video, okay? About the U.S. losing economic dominance, okay?
Well, because it's losing in peaceful economic competition. The United States claims its economy is dynamic, etc., but the real reality is that it's losing in the competition to China. I mean, if we take the situation in the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic, in the 3 years of the pandemic, China's economy grew 2.5 times as fast as the United States. China grew over 13%, the US just over 5%. If you take the addition to world GDP in this period, it's 36% to China and about 16% to the United States. Then if you look at the individual companies, the US can't compete in telecommunications with Huawei. TikTok has become the most popular, so therefore the US is trying to ban Huawei. TikTok has become the most visited website in the world, so the US is now considering banning TikTok. Hikvision is the best producer of cameras for surveillance, etc. I mean, for safety surveillance in the world. So the US can't compete with that. The US admits that the whole solar power industry is totally dominated by China. The US is losing in peaceful economic competition. The only place in which it maintains a lead is military, because it spends more than the next 9 countries in the world put together. So therefore increasingly tends to try to put things on a military terrain. And this is very, very dangerous, because the world wants to get on with peaceful development, but the US wants to move things more and more towards military actions.
So let's see if we're talking about peace, okay? Because a lot of people keep talking about Trump wants peace, right? And I keep telling you, yeah, he does want peace. A piece of your land, and a piece of that land, and a piece of that land, and a piece of those resources, and a piece of those resources, and a piece of that economy, and a piece of that. A tapestry of greed. That's what they want. Now, you can judge a person by their actions, okay? More so than their words. What is peaceful about arming Israel to slaughter Palestinians? What is peaceful about arming Israel to bomb Lebanese? What is peaceful about arming Israel to bomb and occupy Syria? What is peaceful about helping and then giving political cover to ISIS, the same group that is the HTS, which is a offshoot of ISIS, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda? On the one hand, you're saying you're fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, then you give them weapons, money, and then political cover to then overthrow the democratically elected government of Syria, because let us not lose sight of that. According to the Carter, the late President Jimmy Carter founded a center called the Carter Center, where it goes around the world and monitors elections to see if they're free and fair. And according to the Carter Center, that Assad won over 75% of the vote in the last election, and it was legitimate. You don't have to take my word for it, just go look it up. So democracy only matters when the candidate is pro-Western, pro-fascist, pro-corporation leaders. But when they're independent-minded, national-minded, sovereign-minded, their elections are fraudulent, and they're not leaders, they're dictators, they're regimes, they're tyrants, they're murderers. Huh? So, the Carter Center verified the elections of President Assad, and nobody screamed. I have yet to hear anybody outside this channel talk about that. When they say the dictator, the butcher, the tyrant, this man won 75% of the vote of the people, at least. I think it was even higher than that, but at least 75%. The Western world leaders would kill for approval rating of 75%. Right now in America, you got people still holding on to Biden, and you got half of the people, just smaller than half of the people for Biden, and then you have just over a majority for Trump. Starmer has little to no support. Macron has 10% support. And you call that man a dictator and a tyrant. Man, I'm telling you, the way they put this bizarro take on things is unreal. So, again, we talk about the dollar and its position. It's being challenged. So, again, we go back to something. And I say things that's going to offend you from time to time. But listen, as I say to everybody, we're all adults. I'm not saying anything that is vain or vulgar. I'm not talking about none of that. I'm not doing any of that. What I'm talking to you on is truth, and sometimes truth offends. And I say that let's be grown-ups here. And sometimes when you get offended or something doesn't go your way or somebody says things that you don't agree with, be man or woman enough to be agreeable enough to not agree. All right? But what I'm going to give you is the truth, and I tell you, they're open sources. Just go look it up and see if I'm lying. So they are making way for war with Iran. What does this have to do with the dollar? They are trying to prevent the Belt and Road from being cemented and established firmly across the globe. They're trying to break it in its infancy in Eurasia. Iran is a prime target. Why? I continue to tell you, look at a map. Iran, just like Afghanistan, is the underbelly of both Russia and China. You destabilize and overtake Iran, you have the Strait of Hormuz, you have the Persian Gulf, you're in the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea. You have all of those waterways, all the way back round to the Red Sea, up into the Mediterranean, that would be pretty much under U.S. control, U.S. and British control. The land routes. Think about this. Occupied Palestine. You have Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. Then you have Iran. You still have remnants of U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan, and you have them in Pakistan. You don't think this is strategic? Huh? They are fighting for their lives. That's what most of you don't understand. The reason that America, Britain, and the West are putting on this full court press and all of this peace talk is because they're fighting for their lives. They need to buy a little political capital to make people let their guards down. And then when your guard is down, they're going to, boom, hit you with a war. So I'm going to go back to something that I said earlier, which is connected to this. Why do you think that the government is doing what it's doing right now, the U.S. government? The removal of so many people from office, right? Qualified people. Some of them wasn't qualified, but a vast majority of them, I'm finding out, were qualified for their position, even if they had the wrong political leaning or whatever, okay? Why do you think so? Because when nations become more dictatorial or more totalitarian, they want their people in certain positions, especially when they've put the needle out to feel the atmosphere of the population to see if the people will agree to a war against Iran. People are screaming. They heard them under Biden's administration. Stop the war against Iran. We see where it's coming from. So what do? You hear right now whispers from Trump administration. We're going to talk to Iran about an agreement. And if they don't agree with us, then there will be consequences. Listen, I want you to understand. How is that negotiating? I'm going to tell you what you can and can't agree on. And if you don't agree with what I said you must agree on, then you're at fault for this agreement not coming through and coming to fruition. So then there must be consequences. There was no agreement in the first place. There was no talk in the first place. These were dictations. I'm coming to you to tell you this is the new nuclear agreement. You must also add your missile capabilities to it. You must add a verification process to it. You must do this and you must do, and if not, then there may be a military component to what we have to do to you. But guess what? It was Donald Trump who pulled out of the nuclear deal in his first administration. And now he's talking about a new nuclear deal, one which will bring Iran's missiles program under such deal. And one has to ask, okay, you say that's a good deal? Then what's good for the goose? Good for the gander. If I were Iran, I would say, okay, you're right. Now, you must also go through this verification process to disarm. Because remember, all of those treaties are based on the disarmament of established nuclear powers. And you have not gotten rid of your nuclear weapons. You are now upgrading your nuclear weapons and missiles. So for me to let you verify my missile program and capability, I must then be able to verify that you are disarming your missiles. And most of all, since I've never used a nuclear weapon, and I have not been proven to have a nuclear weapon, and we only know one nation that has used a nuclear weapon, then that nation that used that nuclear weapon must first lead by example. And if you're not going to lead by example, then shut the hell up talking to me. Because you're not going to dictate to me. That's not how it's going to go. You got thousands of nuclear weapons in your arsenal, and you're afraid that I get one. Why? You're afraid because if I get one, you can't cow me. You can't beat me. You can't berate me. You cannot take over my resources. You can't make me bow to your dictates. You cannot then use your poodle Israel and their nuclear weapons to make me bow to your dictates, or the nations around bow to your dictates. And this is unacceptable. America must have advantage in everything. This is the state of mind of these people who run the globe, or who were running the globe, who are now faltering and festering and collapsing. All right? Listen to me, everybody that's listening. You know what I'm saying is reasonable. You know what I'm saying is right. Oh, we got Glenn in the building. We have Glenn. He made it with us. So I'm going to bring Mr. Diesen in. Professor Diesen is in the building. How's it going today, Glenn?
Oh, very good. Thank you. It's good to see you again.
Glenn, we were just talking about the situation with the debt situation in America, and how the empire is becoming more desperate because of the debt burden, and how this is causing irrational policies to be implemented by the West. What do you say about that?
No, I agree, and I think this is a very vital thing. I think one of your senators, Rand Paul, was it? He had a good comment once. He pointed out that the option isn't between whether or not to keep the empire. He said, do we want an organized withdrawal or a chaotic one? Because the numbers don't lie. The empires are expensive, and the US is running itself into debt. So there is a need to cut back on this. And if the US doesn't do it in a structured way, organized in a way which preserves what's important, then it will happen in a chaotic way. So this idea to just hold on and then everything will be fine, that this is a flawed assumption. But I just want to add that it was also widely predictable. I mean, during good times, it's usually, when you send the sailor ship out and there's good days, this is when you fix up the ship. But after the Cold War, the United States really had a chance to get all its debts in order, its financial system. But instead, it went from a couple of trillions to now 36.5 trillion. So and this was during the good years. So now there's a need to make changes. And again, the United States is an important country. So we're all rooting for you. I hope you can turn this around. Well, it's a lot of people who will have a lot of misery if things start to go wrong, and I think they're already going wrong.
Well, what do you think about the U.S. Backstabbing Europe? Because Europe right now is going through a chaotic phase economically and politically, and they were the ones to jump on the bandwagon with the United States when the United States wanted to sanction Russian oil and gas. And then the United States says, don't worry about it. We have liquefied gas we'll sell to you. And then as the sanctions take effect, the United States come back and say, hey, the gas will be triple the price now. I mean, what kind of friend is that? And what do you think about that?
It is an interesting development. You can go even further back. I mean, if you go back to a lot of this crisis began in 2008 when the U.S. pressured the Europeans to accept this promise that we would offer future NATO membership to Ukraine. You know, the Germans at that time said that this would be interpreted as a declaration of war by the Russians. Everyone realized this would end in tears, but they nonetheless bent to the Americans, and then we walked this long path together, and all the predictable bad things happened. The Americans told us, let's put some sanctions on the Russians, let's cut them off, and then our key energy infrastructure, that is the Nord Stream gas pipelines, were blown up, most likely by the United States. And now suddenly, the US is saying, well, the Ukraine war, that's kind of a European conflict. It's nothing to do with us. So it is an interesting approach. I don't really disagree with the sentiment. I think the Europeans have gone lazy. For 80 years. The Americans have been paying for our security while we just developed welfare states instead. So it's I'm not dismissing all the criticism that the US have sent, but this is the Europeans who brought this disaster. It's not completely genuine either. But no, it is interesting what's happening now. In Europe we are the 40-year-old son who refused to move out of the basement, and I think we're getting kicked out now. So maybe something good will come from it, but there is some sentiment that we call it backstabbing, but I think one also have to be honest in geopolitics. Great powers, they look after their own interests first. This a delusion we have in Europe that somehow we're friends and we're going to look after each other's interests, and America will put Europe ahead of itself if necessary. It's just, this is a thing which has never been and never will be. It's geopolitical immaturity. So I think it's getting painful, but hopefully our political leaders will learn something from this.
You don't think it's a little too late because the world is reorganizing and shifting from west to east, and the bulk of the gold has flown to the east? All of the institutions that the east are now building outside of the west. You have more trade with national currencies. You have all kind of institutions now that have been put up by China and the BRICS that are opposite of Western institution and everything. Do you think that it's a little bit too late? Because think about this, Glenn. Europe has little to no major resources, and the United States seems to hoard her resources or sell them to Europe at an exorbitant price. Yeah. Wouldn't this do some serious economic damage to Europe when everything is reorganized globally?
Well, no, it's doing a lot of harm. Again, the main economic force of Europe has been Germany. This has been the economic locomotive driving Europe before. But it's very history, which is very energy intensive, and the cheap energy has come from Russia. So by pressuring the Europeans to cut themselves off, Europe is deindustrializing. And instead, they're relying now on buying energy from the Americans, and the Americans are selling it at as much as they can get for it. No, it's very problematic, and making matters worse when the industries here can't compete anymore, such as what you're seeing in Germany. Then the United States come over with the what's called the Inflation Reduction Act, which is offering subsidies to the companies who can't, be competitive with the high prices due to the high energy costs from America. So they're being offered to move across to America where the energy is cheaper. So we are. There is a recognition. There's more and more politicians. So Germany, France, all over, who are saying that the Americans are bleeding us effectively. But we're also at war, and when there's a war situation. And there's excessive dependence on the United States, it kind of prevents anyone from being too loud in their criticism.
So what about, let's turn for a second to the Trump administration and them echoing that a cessation of violence with Ukraine for 30 days. And this has been in the background for weeks now. And Russia has already stated that there will be no pause in the violence or the special military operation until core interests are taken in consideration and accepted. And now we see in the media that they're putting it forward that Trump is offering a cessation of violence for 30 days, which is against what Russia said that they would accept.
It is a very strange deal. It did take me a bit by surprise as well, because Russia has been very open that they're not interested in simply another ceasefire, because a ceasefire without a political solution, one have to ask what is the point of this, because there has to be some solution at the end, because otherwise the US and the Europeans will just use this pause to rearm Ukraine. Indeed, America said that, well, now they will restart arms supplies to Ukraine. And of course, the Ukraine will continue mobilization. So if you follow the news, our news has almost blanked it out, which is an impressive propaganda campaign. What has happened in Kursk, the entire front line there collapsed. The Ukrainians are having a very disorganized withdrawal where all their troops are being eliminated, or they're surrendering, or they're being encircled. So there's a huge catastrophe going on, and now we're saying, well, let's have a 30-day break. We can Ukrainians can regroup, we can rearm them, and it's one have to ask, what is in it for the Russians, because a ceasefire doesn't necessarily end the war. You have to address some of the issues. So again, Russia invaded for the key purpose was it wanted Ukraine to restore its neutrality. Well, the Europeans now, especially the British, are talking about, well, if there's a ceasefire, then European troops can come in and observe the peace. This is wild. They would function as a tripwire. Then this would pull the Europeans into the war, and this is not a war between Ukraine and Russia only. This is a proxy war. This is a war between the NATO countries and Russia. So you can't have the other side come into the war and start to patrol the Russian borders. This is just absurd. So this was sold, and now, what does it all mean? It could be simply tactics from the Trump administration as well, because Zelensky said he wouldn't negotiate. Now, of course, he accepted a ceasefire. The Europeans, they also can't imagine anything else but war. Now they're all going out tweeting the comment by Rubio, which was, ball in Russia's court, because they see it as now the Americans and Russians will possibly clash over this. And if there's a clash, then Europe's dreams of continuing the war can go fulfilled. So, they're winning the Americans over on their side, and the war is back on. So they're very excited. But maybe this is a way of getting the Europeans to, accept peace negotiations, just like the Ukrainians. I hope this is this very devious mind of Trump, because if it's just here's a ceasefire and it's simple as that, then it's very disappointing, because this will not go down well in Moscow at all.
I hear a lot of people when they talk about Trump needs a ceasefire so that he can recalibrate and focus on China. And I'm one of the ones that say that. But why do you think people just accept that as something right, that the United States should just pause what it's doing in Europe to focus on China to try to make war with China? I mean, a life is a life, and wrong is wrong, regardless of the U.S. was wrong in trying to put its tentacles on Russia's borders, and in my opinion, the U.S. is wrong in trying to stretch its tentacles to Taiwan and into China's yard or whatever. So why does most pundits they don't even think about this as a provocation to China when they speak about the United States pausing against Russia and then refocusing on China?
Well, it's a very dangerous mentality at the bottom of this, which is the idea that peace is created by simply defeating your adversaries. The former American ambassador to Russia, to the Soviet Union, Jack Matlock. He participated in negotiating then to the Cold War in 1989, and he once expressed, well, he wrote in his books, a great concern that 2 years after the Cold War had been declared over in 89, 2 years later in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and when Bush said, "Oh, we won the Cold War. It wasn't negotiated. We won it." And he said that this myth-making was so dangerous to the American psyche because suddenly the lessons was not that the Cold War hadn't ended by enhancing mutual understanding, taking into account each other's security, and find a way of reducing tensions. No, security was achieved by defeating the opponent. We defeated the Soviets. Now we won. Now there's peace. And this kind of built into a very militaristic view that, at the end you would have the great powers, lock eyes in a great showdown, and a bit like a Western. And then the Americans, as long as they didn't back down, they would triumph. And this is very, cartoonish way of looking at security. It's not good for the United States either. This is, war with China is this planet of ours. It's not that big. We all inhabit it. It's a disaster. There's no good scenario of having a war with China in which anyone gains.
Do you think that Zelensky really has the independence to do as the Western media is saying, that he can defy the United States and Great Britain and NATO? It's hard for me to believe that he has that much leeway when he's protected by U.S. and British special forces, and that the United States supplements his government budget, and then the United States and NATO are the ones giving him weapons for his military to fight. It's hard for me to believe that he has all this independence to implement policy that will be in opposition to the West.
No, he's been a puppet all along. Indeed, where is his power? Keep in mind that he won the presidential election in Ukraine in 2019 on a landslide. In a landslide, he got 73% of the votes, but he ran on a peace platform. If you remember, he was going to allow the ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine to speak Russian. He was going to allow them to have religious freedoms. He was going to allow them to keep their own media, to have their own political rights. They're allowed to speak their own language. He was going to make peace with Donbass, peace with Russia. He's going to implement the Minsk agreement. The U.S. with the far-right, Nazi militias, put a lot of pressure on him. The American, and also not just American, but Western NGOs, they also put threats against him and warning him not to implement his peace platform. And he flipped right away. So has much changed? No, he's becoming even more dependent now on foreign backers. This what's happened in proxy wars, that the foreign backers gain more and more influence. So I don't see this, and that he has much power to resist anything. Indeed, and I think Trump knows this, because when he started to reject Trump's push for negotiations, what did Trump do? He called Zelensky a dictator. He pointed out that perhaps he's not a legitimate leader. After all, his mandate ran out in May of last year. So why is he a legitimate leader? And also, he said 4%, only 4% approval rating. Now, I don't believe in that number. I don't know where it came from. I don't think he could possibly win an election. Don't get me wrong. I think he's very much hated by large parts of Ukraine, but it's not 4%. But Trump has his own facts at time, it seems. But it's very important that he puts all this pressure, and then he cuts the arms supplies, the intelligence, and effectively goes to the rest of the political class and say, listen, the reason why you're not getting any more weapons, why you're not getting the intelligence, and you will now lose, is because we can't work with Zelensky. If he wouldn't be here, then maybe we could work together. I mean, this is you put a target on his back, and also when there was negotiations in Saudi Arabia, they sent Yermak, not Zelensky. So he flew back. He was there. He flew back, I think, the day before or something. So it's very it's if he doesn't toe the line, America can get a new president for Ukraine who will do as he's told. So I don't see this power of his. The Europeans are trying to prop him up, but I don't think that's enough. The Europeans are becoming quite irrelevant.
Okay, I hear this line in most media, especially in alternative media, about Zelensky is ungrateful and he keeps asking for weapons and keep asking for money. And I'm no Zelensky supporter. As a matter of fact, I think what Russia is doing to stymie the expansion of NATO is very valiant and it's heroic. But the United States promised Ukraine money. They promised Ukraine weapons. The British promised Ukraine weapons for as long as it takes and whatever they need. And when this man is screaming about it, now it seems like even the alternative media flipped and they're blaming Zelensky when he's the puppet. And then you hear Trump saying that Ukraine owes us $350 billion or $500 billion. And my thing is, we have proof, historical proof, that it was the United States and NATO that violated the agreement signed after Ukraine became an independent nation, where Russia, nor Europe, nor the United States would intervene in the sovereign affairs of Ukraine. Then we see that the United States had plans to intervene and to overthrow the democratically elected Eastern-leaning government of Yanukovych. Then they put $5 to $10 billion into that. Britain came along, NATO did everything. And now that the outcome of the war is in doubt for them and it's not panning out, now it seems like they want to strong arm the victim and get money back that they invested in for overthrowing the democratically elected government and using them as a battering ram against Russia. How is that even sound policy?
No, I think it's a shakedown. It's the war is over. They've been defeated. So I think everyone's just taking what they want now. So for the Russians, they're taking territory. The Americans will take their natural resources. The Europeans want their young men to keep fighting. So everyone wants something from the Ukrainians. But I agree. I think selling this as Zelensky being greedy, want more money. This was the deal, though, because keep in mind, when the Russians invaded in 2022, Zelensky himself confirmed that they contacted him on the very next day of the invasion to say, let's start negotiations right away. We don't want to occupy your country. We want neutrality. And this was the main aspect. This is what everyone recognized. The Ukrainians who participated in negotiations, the mediators from Israel, Turkey, everyone recognized the same thing. The Russians wanted restoring neutrality. And as Zelensky himself said in an interview in The Economist, he said in March of 2022 that many countries in the West would like a long war to bleed the Russians, even if it meant the destruction of Ukraine. So he knew where this was going. But at one point when he was visited by the UK and the US, he was sold a deal. Like, you don't have to make a compromise. You don't have to make a deal. You can get everything you want. We'll give you all the weapons you need. The Russians can't stand up against this. At some point, they will have to accept defeat and walk this back. So this was the deal. You walk away from the peace agreement, choose a war, and we'll give you all the weapons you want. Now, of course, the war has been lost. We're defeated by the Russians, and now we're starting this narrative. Well, it wasn't really military aid; they were gifts. We want our money back. This is some of this was credit. It was, but certainly not all of it. So coming now and wanting our money back because they weren't able to defeat the Russians and there was a bad investment, pay us back. It's kind of gruesome because they paid already with hundreds of thousands of lives. They're young men. Millions of people have fled to Russia and to Europe. So the country has been destroyed. All the 20% of the territory, which is the good part, the coastline, the natural resource, the agriculture, the black soil, all of this now is lost. So, and now, of course, at their weakest, we're telling them, okay, give us our money back. You couldn't win the war. I mean, it's to sell it as simply, the Ukrainians are begging for money. I don't think this is fair. Again, but I agree with your sentiment. I don't care much for how Zelensky has run Ukraine and the decision he has made and the things he has done to the Ukrainian people as well. But on this area, reality is reality, and I think on this issue, reality is on his side.
So why do you think a lot of people in the alternative media continues to trumpet that that Zelensky is being ungrateful and greedy, and that he doesn't want peace, but the Trump administration and the West wants peace, and they are the ones who started the conflict?
No, this is true. Well, Zelensky doesn't want peace. The Europeans also don't want it. It's only the United States at this point. But it's an interesting time because it becomes a bit disingenuous to say that now the Americans are the peacemakers, because they were the main ones, simply not because they're worse than us, but they were the main powers. They were the main one pushing this policy forward, who brought us to war. So I know now that again, this is a symptom of a polarized country. But when Trump says, "Well, the war started because of Biden," we knew we shouldn't have tried to expand NATO to Ukraine. We knew that this would start a war. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. One shouldn't, do your domestic politics laundry in public. This is when you're operating in international sphere. Whatever Biden did is also America's. It's on America's book. So you can't just say, "Oh, that was Biden." Oh, well, it was also the United States. So to just wipe the hands of this now, it's not it's not a pretty look, I guess.
So also, Glenn, with the West always trumpeting democracy, why is it that when a Democratic leader is elected that is not pro-West, that is not pro-NATO, they become illegitimate or tyrants or abysmal people, and we see that what's going on in Romania, and yet nobody is really talking about the disqualification of the one who was going to win the elections in Romania.
Yeah, well, this is we're a bit like the Soviet Union now, we say the EU aligning with the EU and NATO. That is democracy. So anyone who deviates from it, they become undemocratic. This is it doesn't make any sense, but it's kind of the logic that we have. So we already see this when you have people like Viktor Orban of Hungary or Robert Fico of Slovakia. They're saying, this proxy war is crazy. We're provoking nuclear war. We're just killing Ukrainians. No one benefiting from this. Let's stop it. We don't accommodate this and open for debate. We call them Putinists and propagandists for Russia. Again, these are state leaders, but nonetheless, this is how they're treated. But they're already in power. But as you correctly noted, in Romania, it looked like we might lose Romania to the peace movement as well. And keep in mind that Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, they're all bordering Ukraine, so they're important for logistics. And now suddenly Romania, we're going to start to talk about peace as well. This doesn't go down well in the European Union. So suddenly we see first that the election results were annulled because Kalin Georgescu, he won. But then he wants to end the war. He's critical of NATO bases in Romania and all. So they came up with this narrative that, well, it was a Russian TikTok campaign that helped him win. So this is a Romanian Russiagate, effectively. And then it turns out there was no evidence for this. On the contrary, there were evidence for being domestic groups in Romania, had nothing to do with Russia. So, but nonetheless, he's not. Now they decided he's not even allowed to run. After first annulling the election, now he can't run. So all the narratives are just nonsense. It's what you have to say in order to disqualify him, and it's very sad, and it's not only examples. We recently had an election in Romania. It looked like the more Russian sympathetic would win, but within Moldova, the pro-EU one would have lost, did lose. But Moldova have a lot of people abroad working. Most would be in Russia, but they put up 2 polling booths in all of Russia, where most Moldovans are. And in Italy, I think they had like 32 or 62, so like a huge, this is a small country. And everything was done in order to prevent, an honest election, all supported by the European Union, of course. Then you have Georgia, who had an election, who said, we want to join the EU, we want to be part of the European Union. However, we don't want to be a frontline against the Russians, so we try to topple their government after the election. I mean, this has become the new face of the European Union. It's very intolerant. It's very defensive. Any threats to its position is attacked as being anti-European, irrespective of people being pro-EU. It's very strange. I think the EU is destroying itself economically, security, and also its entire legitimacy. It's not a great. We're not living among political giants at the moment.
It's amazing that you brought up Moldova and you brought up Georgia. Those were the countries that I was going to throw in there, and you hit it right on the head. But also, let us not forget, what is his name? Fico.
Fico.
Fico, and also the president of the prime minister of Hungary. They're trying to demonize him. They tried to kill I cannot pronounce his name.
Fico,
Fico, he tried to kill him.
Yeah, the prime minister of Slovakia, he was shot with all these demonization campaigns. He was shot, and the media reports, they focused on, well, he's a bit of an extremist and he's pro-Putin, so you can understand why people will be upset. And the media expressed concern that perhaps after he recovered, he might become very vengeful against the political opposition to get revenge for being shot. It's a very strange way to react when the head of state is shot, and you start to demonize him for perhaps he wants to seek revenge in the future. By the way, for Ford, he never sought revenge against anyone. He's but it's all this is our media now. They're effectively whitewashing and getting close to being cheerleaders for assassination of political leaders. It's very, very strange times, as I said.
Well, Glenn, what do you think will be the outcome of this situation with the U.S. and Ukraine, NATO and Europe and Russia? Because earlier you said that Russia has effectively won the war. But let us not forget, Russia didn't just defeat Ukraine. It defeated the United States. It defeated Britain. It defeated the entirety of Europe and NATO.
No, I agree. And this is why also this talk now that if the Russians do not fall in line and accept a ceasefire, then they're going to bring hell upon Russia. Exactly what? I mean, if there were all this huge weapon depots of weapons which could be sent, then it would be sent. Under Biden, it hasn't happened. And as Marco Rubio said, we're all sanctioned out. There's nothing else that can be done. And if we continue to do more sanctions, it's only going to push Russia even further towards China. And I think the West also has a huge problem with rearmament. That is a key consequence of this economic war with the Chinese is that the Chinese are retaliating and they're cutting a lot of access to rare earth minerals. Now, if you look at some of these minerals, like as antimony, it's used almost in all military applications, and it's the demand is quite high. It's only 2/3 can actually be supplied, and I think about 90% of it comes from China. And how is this going to work now that they put restrictions on it? So we could have huge problems, and so I'm not sure what could actually be done, what kind of pressure we can put on the Russians. But I'm kind of hoping for our sakes and the Russians that this is just a tactic by Trump, because they must by now be aware that the political foundation has to be resolved. I mean, this was the big breakthrough when Hegseth came along and said there will be no NATO expansion, there will be no, we have to accept loss of territory, and there will be no security guarantees. These are the things not only we should discuss, but we should also be discussing what the European security architecture can look like. that perhaps expanding NATO and anti-Russian military bloc closer and closer to Russian border, placing our missiles on Russian borders, perhaps this was not the best recipe for peace and stability. So if we can find a new way, this will be the way to go. Instead, we have this 30-day ceasefire. And exactly what's happening after 30 days. Zelensky doesn't want to do any of the same things which Pete Hegseth suggested. So it just seems pointless. And if it is pointless, one has to question why it's being done. Either it's malign intentions from the Trump administration, or maybe it's just, as I said before, maybe it's just to try to pull the Ukrainians and the Europeans towards the negotiation table. It's too early to be seen. But if it is setting up a conflict with Russia deliberately by here, take this deal, otherwise now it's your fault, and we're gonna essentially pursue Biden politics. It would be, we could be walking down a very, very dangerous path.
Just to shift a little bit, Trump's administration has a lot of anti-China people in it. And a lot of people think that the Trump administration is pro-peace. And Trump himself is openly stating that the U.S. will confront China. And I was looking at the sanctions that he placed on China, Mexico, and Canada, especially the first ones with steel. And even though there were only a 10% tariff on China, when you look at the tariffs that he placed on Mexico and Canada, it had everything to do with China, because China was the largest exporter of steel to Canada and the largest exporter of steel to Mexico, which then exported some of it to the United States. So this was an all-around hit at China. Now, if America is pivoting to Asia, and we see her capabilities, her military industrial capabilities vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine with NATO, how does she think that she can manage a war with China, a rising superpower that has an industry that dwarfs hers, NATO, and Russia combined?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I have to say, though, that this idea that Trump is simply a man of peace, I mean, maybe he has a bit of a reluctance to war. I actually might give him this, because he seems to, his desire to end the Ukraine war, he keeps referring to this. Also, I think he's cautious and reluctant to be pulled into a war against Iran. But this being said, it doesn't mean that he's for ending any rivalry with the Chinese. Indeed, he has escalated it very much so. And I think it's just different policy. That is the U.S. is worried about China and Russia getting closer. So what do you do? Well, under Biden, the idea, as many American leaders said, let's knock out the Russians using Ukrainians. Once they're knocked out, we can focus our resources on China. This didn't work. So now Trump administration more or less have said, well, let's reach out to the Russians, make friends, and then maybe we can split them a bit away from the Chinese. But China is seen as the main rival. And again, as Rubio pointed out as well, they're recognizing now that we have entered already a multipolar world. There's many centers of power. And unlike the unipolar era, where the US will be everywhere at the same time, the US has to learn how to prioritize. Well, what goals does it want to go after? And Europe's not a high priority. China is. So America wants to pull to some extent away from Europe and focus its energies on China. So to think only in the terms of peace and war, I don't think this is the correct framing.
Do you think that they will miscalculate? Because I think it's absolutely insane for a nation that relies on China's goodwill, with the buying of bonds, with most of the store shelves filled with Chinese goods, and then depend on China's manufacturing capacity for its industries and stuff, to then deem it as the number one threat and then try to make war with it. That's insane, especially when you're 37 trillion in debt.
again, I tend to be a bit sympathetic to the objectives of the Trump administration to pursue very strong industrial policies, but this doesn't have to be done against China. If you accept that the U.S. is one among many great powers, they can work with the Chinese. But at this point in time, the U.S. is in a very vulnerable economic position. The idea that it should now push back and start to engage in some kind of economic warfare, I think is very dangerous, because China would probably win this, as we've seen so far.
Do you think that rings in the minds of those in power? Because it seems like they continue to implement policies that are absolutely the opposite of what you just said.
Sorry, one more time.
Do you think that it rings into the head of the people that they would lose this war with China? Because it seems like they continue to implement policies that are the absolute opposite to that.
Yeah, no, they're doubling down on failure effectively, and this is a key problem because, well, we already knew that a lot of the economic assumptions were wrong. It was assumed that the Chinese could not innovate properly in artificial intelligence. Now, of course, recognizing that they're taking the lead, there was assumption also pushed by Silicon Valley that if America simply cuts off access to the semiconductors, that the Chinese tech giants will begin to fall apart. Instead, the Chinese were able to innovate and develop its own chips. So time and time again, we see that we kind of fooled by our own propaganda, and we should stop underestimating China. And also, I think we should stop seeing them as an inherent threat. We should be blessed that the Chinese haven't expressed any ambitions to have any global hegemony or dominance. And it does mean that we're not going to have conflicts or some tensions, but there's some areas where we might not be able to agree, and some areas where we can cooperate. The idea that we just have to now enter a new Cold War and take them down, it's a very strange way of approaching it, especially when the odds are not on our side.
Well, it seems that they're making strategic moves against China as we speak, because they went to undermine China in the Panama Canal. They're trying to undermine China and Russia in Africa. They're doubling down on their policy in the Near East, and now they're trying to pivot all the way to the Pacific. Could you explain to the people that are listening what this would mean? Conflict between the U.S. and China?
Well, it would be a disaster, but I think more so for the United States, because China is more self-sufficient to the extent that it often dominates the entire supply chains. So if you look at the tech partnerships, all the tech competition, the Chinese, they have the mines, they have the rare earth minerals, they have the mining, which they get the rare earth minerals out. They're doing the processing, they're doing the basic manufacturing, they're doing the high-end innovation. They go up and down the entire value chain, and they can do everything. And this is actually a big part of their economic strategy as well. They try to control the whole platform. And in the United States don't have this advantage. They're dependent on China for this for the rare earth minerals. And as we saw, when they stopped selling chips to the Chinese, the Chinese just began creating their own ones, and instead you saw a collapse within Intel, not collapse, but severe struggle and reduction. You have to fire a lot of people, and if you have to fire a lot of people, you don't have, if your majority customer are the Chinese, suddenly you don't have the finance anymore to invest more in research and development. So I think this is the wrong path to take. I think if the goal was to break China, it should have been done in the 90s. That time is over, and I think it's good. I think we can work with China. It's not necessary to break their legs here. So I'm hoping there will be some cooler heads which will prevail, because a lot of this seems very, very unnecessary. And
have you I'm sorry. Have you ever read Pete Hegseth's book?
No.
Oh, Uh, it'll give you some insight of his thinking. But on here, I want to read something for you from RT, and they drop the ball and they let the bird out of the cage of why they really want to confront China in this. And the name of the article on RT is called "U.S. Ready for War with China," Hegseth, and it says the Pentagon's chief statement comes amid escalating trade tensions with Beijing. The U.S. is prepared to go to war with China if necessary. The Pentagon has announced following Beijing's threat of tariff retaliation in what marks another escalation in an ongoing trade war between the world's two largest economies. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth clarified the U.S. position early on Wednesday in an interview with Fox News. Responding to the Chinese embassy in the U.S., which said Beijing was ready to fight any type of war, Pete Hegseth says, "We are prepared," Hegseth said, adding, "Those who long for peace must prepare for war," stressing deterrence in the warrior ethos. Here it comes. "We live in a dangerous world with powerful, ascendant countries that have very different ideologies," he said. "They're rapidly increasing their defense spending, modernizing technology." Then he says they want to supplant the United States. And I believe that is the main thinking of all of them. If we go back to the 80s, economically, Japan was in a similar position vis-a-vis the United States, and the United States sabotaged their own allies' economy to bring it down. They waited a little bit too late with China because China was a little innovative in its economic outreach. So it seems to me that the only thing left for the United States is war, because they can't outcompete China. They can't. They've lost their position as the world's largest trader. They've lost it as the world's largest investor, the largest trade partner, the largest manufacturer. China leads in AI technology. It leads in solar technology. It leads in so many areas. They have the fastest supercomputers, and in reality, they have the largest economy in the world, and they have put up all of these institutions that counter U.S. and Western domination, like the counter to the IMF, the counter to the World Bank, the counter to SWIFT. All of the only thing left the United States has is military, and China has quickly filled the gap of that. And I believe that this is pushing the United States closer to a war, because they can't see any nation outside of the United States ruling or being the preeminent power or even an equal power to the United States. What says you on that matter?
No, I agree with that assessment. It's worth noting that what was done to Japan in the late 80s was it couldn't necessarily be done with China, because Japan was fully dependent on the United States for security. It has the American military base there. There was they're more dependent. China, which has more of an adversarial position, it doesn't have, it's not full of American military bases. Also, it has historically it's been better at self-sufficiency, so it could resist some of these pressures. But no, I fear the same thing, that a key problem is that the United States can't compete anymore. At least in the past, there was the decency to pretend as if sanctions and economic coercion was due to human rights abuses. So, we don't like what's happening in Xinjiang, so now we're going to put some sanctions on you. And now they're not even doing this. They're very open that we're struggling to compete with the Chinese, so let's throw a wrench into their economic machinery, try to slow them down. And this is very, very dangerous. And also it's failing. So what happens when you can't compete economically with China anymore? Well, you have suddenly an incentive to militarize the economic competition. And this is, I think, what you're seeing now in places, like Taiwan. I know there's all this rhetoric that, of course, every narrative has to suggest that we are simply defending and anything would be unprovoked, much like in Ukraine. But with Taiwan, there has been a deal since the late 70s, which was the one China policy or principle, in which we recognize there's only one China, Taiwan's a part of it, and the capital is in Beijing. So at this point, the Carter administration agreed, okay, the United States will restrict itself to cultural and economic relations with Taiwan. We're not going to have political or military, because we recognize that Taiwan is part of China. Well, not anymore. Now military is sent there, high-level politicians go there, and this is all a way of chipping away at the One China principle. And if I think China's willing to seek integration of Taiwan with economic means, but if the U.S. and its allies are pushing for Taiwan secession, this would trigger a Chinese military response. And I'm sure we would all then squeal unprovoked, to make sure that we are the good guys. But this will be very dishonest. And it's concerning to me that we see all this provocative behavior, and meanwhile pretending as if this is just communists or Chinese who don't share our values. That's why they're being aggressive. But again, I hate to be crude, but media these days become really, really awful. It's very difficult to find value there anymore.
In closing, Glenn, because I know you're busy and I don't want to take up all of your time, but I just want to ask you, do you believe that the United States will be the global hegemon in the next 10 years? And do you believe that they will go down without a fight?
No and no. I think no. I think it's already. If you look in terms of, we often look at what do you call it, the GDP as the only measurement, but this isn't. GDP is supposed to measure wealth creation, but if you borrow $1 million from China to buy $1 million worth of consumables from China, your GDP can go up, but it's not a sign of wealth creation; it's wealth destruction. So I think. If you look at purchasing power parity, what you can actually use for the money, in this measurement, the Chinese went already past the American economy back in 2014. And also you have to measure what's the extent of the economy they can control. No, they're ascending. They're doing quite well. While the U.S. is really deep, this debt troubles. This will really create problems. I'm very convinced that they will. Again, I don't want to try to time anything, but there's a financial crisis coming, and it can hit the U.S. dollar quite heavy because there's not that many other tools in the toolbox. So I think it's. I think the U.S. can recover from this, but not as a hegemon. It has the benefit. Having these two great oceans with the rest of the world, it can pull a bit back, lick its wounds, rebuild its strength. It's a societal cohesion, all of this, but this insistence on dominating even outside on China's coastline, I think this is very destructive and counterproductive.
So this is the fall of the American empire, you're saying?
Well, yeah, no, I think so. I think it's overextended. Clearly, I mean, there's numbers for this. This amount of debt now, with especially interest rates going up, it's very hard to service debt on this level. So when interest rates are low, there will be a crisis in the currency. When the interest rates go high, you're going to have inability to service the loans. So there's no good ways of coming out of this. This is the reality is, as many people warned in the 90s, hegemony, this idea of having security through global primacy or global hegemony, global dominance, whatever you want to call it, it would be a temporary phenomenon. Over time, the US would exhaust its resources, and other centers of power will begin to collectively balance the US. That's what we've seen. And this is also why the US, by the way, used to have an offshore balancing strategy, that it meant, don't set your boots in Europe or in Asia, because just enter wars late when everyone else is exhausted. Just make sure a new balance of power is established, and then get the hell out of there, because once you have a presence, it's going to be drain the resources, and suddenly the local actors on that continent, instead of balancing each other, they're going to start to work together against the US. So it's I think it would be good for the US to pull back a bit, get some attention off itself, and recover its economic strength, and it can be a real force for good in the world. I think at the moment, if you could make unipolarity work in the 90s when all power was concentrated in the US, the idea that it can be done now is fantasy.
Well, thank you for joining me, Mr. Professor Glenn Diesen. All of his information is in the description below. Go sign up, subscribe to Glenn, check out all of his work on Substack and everywhere else. Glenn does excellent work. I want to thank you, Glenn, for giving us your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rashid. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Thank you. Be blessed, man.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Everybody, listen. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me today. You didn't have to, but you stayed this long. I told you we had something good cooking for you, and Glenn popped up. Again, always remember to do right by others, not because there's some material gain or some kind of accolades or applause behind it. Do right because it's the right and the humane thing to do. Remember, tomorrow at 11 or 10 a.m. Central Time, we'll have the Robin Hood of Wall Street, Gregory Mannarino, on the platform. So make sure you join us. Mark it down on your calendar. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous and hit that like button and share. It doesn't cost a thing. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces. We're out of here. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just